Welcome. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Today we are going to discuss a use case near and dear to our heart, talking about how the SpartanNash and Hexaware team tackled AP and AR automation supporting or using Ephesoft. So we're going to get started. If you have any questions, anything you'd like to ask the panel, please do enter them into the chat or the Q&A window. We'll address them live, as many as possible, with as much time is left at the end of the webinar. So yeah, please feel free to enter that chat. So again, this is a fun story, a fun use case. Would like to talk about what we've done for SpartanNash and with SpartanNash to support them in their automation journey. So I would love to introduce the panel that's going to be speaking this afternoon, starting with Anila. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hi guys, my name is Anila Bukhari, and I'm working as an IT application director in the SpartanNash company. I joined in sometime in 2019, and I've been have worked in as a software engineer throughout my career, and a software manager, then a senior manager with multiple companies like Motorola and BlackBerry and Northrop Grumman. And this is one of the new challenges that I wanted to get into the business process automation services, and I'm enjoying my time so far in SpartanNash here. So that's it.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Anila. We're happy to have you. And Chandru?
Yep, thank you so much, Brandon, and good afternoon, Anila. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for joining this conversation. My name is Chandrasekar Ramaswamy. I go by Chandru. I lead Hexaware's intelligent automation practice across North America, and happy to be in this call and talking about this great project that the team has delivered.
Perfect. And my name is Brandyn Campbell. I'm on our business development team here at Ephesoft, and I work really closely with the Hexaware team, supporting automation initiatives for the system integrator here in the Americas. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about or kind of discuss before we really get into the meat of what was done and how it was accomplished, is to give a little bit of background on process automation in general for grocery stores and for retail, which is kind of applies to all of the commercial world as well. Something to note here, it's grocery and retail are some of the lowest profit margins or industries that have the lowest profit margins globally. On average, a good profit margin is between 1% and 3%. And that's something that is incredibly important, I think, when we consider back office processes, specifically around automation, because so much of the focus of the organization, and Anila, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but so much of the focus is on the customer experience, that customer retention, the logistics of supply chain and actually stocking physical stores, the physical store maintenance and staffing. There's so much focus on that and so much investment there that back office processes are often overlooked as an area of automation and potential cost savings. So it makes it just this like very ripe niche within, if I can use a grocery pun there, it's a very ripe niche within this particular industry for return on investment, because automation has the potential to potentially help that bottom line. Now, we've all heard specific to accounts payable, that number 14. It's a pretty commonly, thrown around number as the average cost for processing a single invoice. And that's pretty darn expensive. It's a really key reason that AP in general is kind of that low-hanging fruit for automation initiatives. The ROI can be absolutely massive for investing in this type of technology. And I know Anila is going to talk a little bit about why they chose AP as one of the first areas to focus on as a business unit for automation. But there's so much more to this particular area than just the number 14, that dollar more amount. So to start, according to the organization Valentis, up to 70% of global invoices are sent and received in paper format. Now, I know when I heard that number, I was like, that's not possible. There is no way that 70% of invoices around the world are in paper. And when Anila and I and Chandru were speaking earlier this week, I asked her about that. And Anila, didn't you say that you guys are still dealing with primarily a huge amount of paper, right?
That is true, actually. Yeah, we have EDI also in place, but still, a lot of our vendors do not still use EDI invoices. So we do end up with a lot of paper invoice, paper formats. Agreed.
And so I mean, that's huge. It's this additional step required to deal with this, baseline functionality of an organization like SpartanNash, of any retail, commercial, manufacturing, like any commercial industry, even the public sector dealing with this. It's absolutely massive. And so that's a huge potential from the perspective of automation for digitizing those records, both from like an ongoing processing perspective, as well as just storage perspective. It adds a layer of complexity. And so adding automation technology to AP and AR specifically has a ton of potential for this reason, if nothing else. Then kind of leading into this, Institute of Financial Management, Finance and Management said that that's 20 times greater cost for an organization to process an invoice in a much more manual manner, as opposed to an organization that has adopted a high level of automation and taken on automation technology. And so to maintain competition, to keep that bottom line as profitable as possible, there's a ton of incentive there. And then there's also just basic things like Anila and Chandru are going to get into a little bit later when we dig into the workflow, how invoices are received and who they're sent to, and how those processes are managed from a replication perspective. If you have a vendor, and SpartanNash is a huge organization and it grows through mergers and acquisitions, and you have small companies and large companies. When you have vendors working with all of these different organizations and sending in invoices, simply sending it to the wrong person or the wrong department can delay that processing by up to 5 days on average, which is massive. There could be late payments. You're missing out on early discounts. That's huge. And then there's also just the issue of potential bad vendor relationships. So there's a lot of soft costs associated with it too. Is there anything to this in general that you wanted to add, Anil or Chandru? Like, I know we talked about previously why this was a first key initiative for you.
Go ahead, Chandru, first.
No, I think, Brandon, you really presented the complexities and the scale at which most of the retailers operate, and that too, knowing SpartanNash, such a large organization, the challenges that were there in even identifying the processes that were catering themselves for automation. At the same time, automating the entire end-to-end accounts payable process jointly with Anila and the team were great learning experience for Hexaware and our entire team as well. So yeah, go ahead. So we'll talk about the project and how we delivered as part of the conversation.
And I just wanted to give a little bit of background where, with respect to SpartanNash as a company, SpartanNash it's a Fortune 400 company and one of the, actually fifth largest food distributor in the United States. They are the leading distributor of grocery products to US, military commissionaries also, right? And we are headquartered in Grand Rapids, but we have offices in Minneapolis, Indianapolis, as well as Norfolk. And this is a result of multiple mergers and acquisitions, actually. So today, the way company stands, it's a merger of SpartanNash, which was formerly a Spartan Stores company based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and a Nash Bench company, which was based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in November 2013, this merger happened, and both companies had their own retail as well as wholesale operations. And Nash Bench had acquired military distributors of Virginia, which is called our MDV division. So we had MDV division, which had their own, ways of doing business. So in the end, as a result of these mergers and acquisition, each business segments has been running their own business processes. They had been running, they have had their own ERP system and business application. So there was a need to consolidate and standardize the business applications also, right? Most of the processes were highly manual, repetitive, and error prone. So I think this is where we partnered with Hexaware to identify what are the areas where we can begin with, and AP process was identified as the low-hanging fruit. AP and AR both actually. And as a result of this automation, now we are getting away from the AP paper invoices. The invoices are now scanned. They're converted into digitized and structured data using the Ephesoft OCR application, and they're passed on to the Automation Anywhere bots for processing and posting to the ERP systems now. So we also added SharePoint as our as a digital archive for all the AP invoices, in order to eliminate the need for physical storage for the paper invoices, and save on the labor hours in locating those invoices for audits and other future references. So this process automation has definitely brought a lot of savings for SpartanNash overall.
Yeah,
And in fact, to add to that, to illustrate the scale of the invoices and the automation that was required, I mean, you can definitely add to these numbers. So we are talking about an average of 100,000 plus annual invoices, and on average, each invoice is about 6 to 7 pages. So we are talking 600 to 700,000 pages of invoices annually being processed, and this, purely from an effort saving point of view in itself, is a great candidate for automation. While the complexities were there, the amount of savings that were done, and at the same time reducing manual intervention and reducing human induced error in this entire process, was a primary driver to automate these steps. And Anila and team have been very closely working with us, and they were instrumental in bringing the different business stakeholders to the same table. And the Hexaware team had to work through multiple challenges because, as Anila initially said, there are so many vendors and so many invoice types, and each invoice type happened to be completely different format. So the team had to work, select the top 30 customers, standardize some of those invoices, take up automation. At the same time, we also made sure that the average handling time of each of the invoice processing does not go beyond the stipulated limits. So there are multiple challenges. We'll get to the actual project execution and how some of these challenges were mitigated a little later in the conversation. But yeah, that's the scale at which we operate, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a really helpful. So what we're looking at right now is just a highly simplified kind of like after workflow. And you mentioned SharePoint and a couple of things, Anila. You talked about the ingestion, Chandru. Something I wanted to make sure we address really quickly before kind of diving a little bit more into what was actually implemented is something that struck me while you were speaking, Anila, is, like you said, SpartanNash has grown through mergers and acquisitions, and you have a combination of large companies merging with, multiple ERP systems. You have some homegrown applications, which I think is a really big factor, consideration to take into account when you're looking at automation projects. You have so much of the physical paper storage. But the way that you were describing kind of like the before state, it made me think that you could almost take this like workflow diagram and kind of just like copy and paste it 3 times to represent just not only the complexity of it, but the duplication of it. And so, like Chandra, you mentioned, having that amount of duplication makes it a really key target process or target business unit for automation, because the potential for ROI is so great. And I think there's I just really wanted to touch on that, because there's so much more than just the complexity of all of these different systems trying to work together. You have so many different aspects of how the business works, what's been built out custom over time, how those custom things interacts with the people and the physical paper and the storage. I know that, Anila, you had mentioned previously, actually storing vendor invoices and purchase orders. There are storage recommendations and guidelines, both from like a legal and an audit perspective of, was it 7 years or 9 years?
We have to keep, the invoices for 7 years at least for audit purposes. Yeah.
So incorporating another technology into it, like SharePoint, and having that as a part of that workflow to automatically route either from the Ephesoft capture piece or the automation anywhere, robotic process directly into that, that library for long-term retention can reduce some of the physical footprint too. Before I kind of get a little further, are you guys planning to do anything by being able to recoup any of that physical storage? Is that potential for cost savings, or is there potential for like reutilization of that space?
So yeah, actually there is a plan to, because now that we have automated most of the AP and AR processes, so we can get away for the future from the, for future, we don't have to save those paper invoices anymore, right? But we do still have historical data, and we are planning to, digitize that as well as an archive that, and so that we don't need those physical storages at all, right?
Yeah.
So that is work in progress in upcoming projects.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, that's kind of a long term from my perspective. Chandra, I don't know how often you speak up about this with, the clients that your team works with, but the actual physical storage, either elimination or reappropriation. I mean, especially as so many companies are downsizing, that's huge.
Absolutely. In fact, the day we start looking at automation, most of our customers purely look only at cost saving or ROI from an FTE reduction standpoint. But there are so many other parameters that people should consider. And as you said, the physical storage requirements in itself is a huge cost burden for companies to maintain. The human induced error, the amount of rework that's required, is another parameter that is generally not taken into consideration while taking up automation.
Yeah,
and there are a lot of cost avoidance initiatives that can be even a driver, not necessarily cost saving, such as regulatory compliance requirements, which can also be a primary driver for automation. Anila, you had something to add?
Yeah, and Chandru, what would happen is that if one of the customer or vendor, have a complaint that, okay, we have not been, paid for this particular item, or I've been short paid, in the past, we would have to go back and find out, ask somebody to physically locate that particular paper invoice in the huge, humongous folders, physical folders, and it was very time consuming. For us, we had to allocate specific, offices within our DCs and retail stores and warehouses. And now we can get away from those eventually as soon as we get everything digitized and archived within our digital, SharePoint archive. We can actually save the time also, labor cost also, for finding and looking up at the right paperwork in order to follow up on certain things with the vendor and our customers, right? So there is labor savings as well there.
Absolutely, cannot agree more.
So that kind of brings up an interesting point from an audit perspective. Have you guys gone through any audits since since starting this project? Like, has that changed the way that your audit work looks?
We have annual audits, at least, for most of the departments, and we have annual SOX audits, etc., and tons of other audits. So yeah, we have seen a lot of improvement. But like I said, since the system has been in place like a year ago, we are gonna see more benefits in coming years, definitely. Because we still have the historical data, which we still need to digitize and put in.
There's the archive and everything. I was curious if that had kind of entered into the equation yet, because I know personally some of the Ephesoft customers we work with have mentioned that specifically, that audits went from like a week-long process to a couple of hours. Give someone access to a particular repository, or when you're able to see what's it called, the document point of control, or you can see every step of that invoice since the moment the letter arrived, or the moment that email showed up in the inbox, all the way through to final disposition. It makes auditability just so much more simple.
Definitely, that is another goal actually that we are working towards, which will happen,
that's definitely another, ROI soft cost that's not considered. Like Chandra, you talked about potential for, FTE reduction, which is what a lot of people look at. But auditability is another one. How much of your time from your accounting staff is taken up each year, if you have annual audits or quarterly or whatever, dedicated
Absolutely.
to preparing information for audits.
Absolutely. And these things cannot be quantified. As you said, these are soft savings. And we encourage all the customers and even organizations that are looking forward to taking up automation on their own right to consider all these parameters and not just look at absolute FTE savings. In fact, absolute FTE savings might be probably 50% of the overall benefit that they might realize through automation, especially the traceability and other audit controls that will be there in place.
Yep, that's
And when we're talking about these processes like AP, you know what we observed? We human have a tendency to find shortcuts, right? So if a process has multiple steps, like more than 10, 20 steps, people are going to try to take shortcuts and, figure out their own way of doing things. So everybody was doing the same process in a different way in all the business segments. Even from DC to DC, it was done differently. There was no standard way before. When we automated this process, now we are sticking to one standard process, right? And it's automated mostly where it could be, wherever it was repetitive. We still have human intervention there. It's not a complete end-to-end automation. We couldn't do that. There would still be some human judgment needed in between. But still, we eliminated all those areas where we had, error-prone activities, or non-standardization of processes, which will result in bad customer experience or result in rework. So we have seen good progress and good results and good customer satisfaction indicators as a result of this.
Now that leads to an interesting point. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about change management later. So I'm going to put a bookmark on that mentally, because I want to definitely make sure we want to cover change management. It's a huge component of it. But before we get into that with like the takeaways and recommendations, a couple of things I wanted to ask about just this overall process flow. So from your perspective, both, Chandra and Anila, for you both, you had this kind of very complex multi-component solution, and you were trying to establish, like you said, Anila, something that's standardized, something that's repeatable, something that presents 100% auditability and automates a lot of the manual tasks. So I know that you have a couple of different ERP systems, a homegrown application, there's content management. The RPA system that you ultimately chose was Automation Anywhere, from a capture perspective for actually grabbing the metadata, the invoices, the line item information from those invoices, was Ephesoft solution, and there's some scanning up front. How did that look, kind of mapping all of that out? Was it something that your team, Anila, took on completely and then kind of handed over to the Hexaware team and said, hey, do this? Was it a collaborative process? Like, what did it look like, figuring out what the end result was supposed to look like?
It was a collaborative effort, right, Chandru?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I should say really praise Anila and her team for agreeing to take up this project, because I think when we internally discussed, they were not waiting for 100% clarity or a vision before clarity of the vision before they could start the project. They were okay to start the project with 80% certainty of what needs to be achieved. And we jointly agreed that, yes, there will always be at least 20% unknowns, which can be resolved during the course of the engagement. And as part of that understanding that we had with SpartanNash, we started the initiative, and with the vision of saving at least 50% FTE reduction through automation. But again, when we started executing this project, we realized the complexities in the different types of invoices, the number of vendors that SpartanNash worked with, the different applications that we had to touch while doing the processing. So we jointly agreed with SpartanNash that, okay, we'll take the top 30 vendors, which in itself contributed to close to 70% of the total number of invoices, the top 30 big ones. We did the automation, and we realized that the complexities of the different invoices made sure that the automated solutions average handling time was much higher than what it was happening when doing manually. So we had to reimagine the entire solution After 6 months of having implemented the solution, we revisited the entire solution, rewrote the entire code, the page, standardized the process, and now the application and the processing is up and running with way lesser average handling times, and which is well within the agreed upon timelines before we started the project.
Nice. I mean, that's interesting. I've heard a lot, kind of as RPA has evolved, as capture technology has evolved and become, more modern, more commonplace. I heard the statistics a lot that 70% of automation initiatives fail. And I'm curious how many of those, considered failures are a result of, you said 6 months in, you weren't seeing the benefits. So it took a little finagling to think, okay, this is actually the appropriate process, or this is actually the appropriate workflow that we should be looking at. And, kind of reimagining what you had done to achieve those results. And I wonder how often it's the case that someone's like, oh, well, it didn't work at first. I'm just done, I lost a lot of money. So I think it's great that collectively everyone kind of kept at it to say, okay, it wasn't a success on the first round, but here we are now having that success. That's great. Okay, so something I wanted to make sure we touched on as well, and I know we've kind of been chatting about this a little bit throughout, is just key takeaways and recommendations. So Anila, you talked about this a lot. Standardization saves labor, automation saves time. I mean, these are just kind of basic things that you would expect from any type of automation project. Getting away from paperwork, you talked about the requirement to maintain records for 7 years, and the potential, reappropriation of physical space and that time on searchability. Something that we haven't really talked about yet is the identification of like the stakeholders within your business unit and engaging them. I would love, Anila, if you could share a little bit from your experience, what it was like selecting AP and AR as the first step for your automation journey, because I understand that the SpartanNash team is looking at a couple of years of automation processes for back office processes, automation initiatives, and a couple of different areas. So, why AP AR first? How difficult was it to get everyone involved? What did change management look like for you?
Yeah, so the reason this process, we were able to, pick up this process again was the leadership, engagement. You have to have the executive leadership engagement in order to be able to, do a project of this scale of automation, right? So our top leaders were aligned. They wanted these processes to be, streamlined, standardized, and automated. We had different business segments, like I mentioned, working in silos, right? Each segment had different departments, and then they're still using their own processes. So we had to break those silos. People are now aligned to one common process. People are aligned to this utilizing the same eventually the same applications. Similar, we still have more work to do. Right? We are not 100% there, to tell you the truth. We still have more there to do. But because of these different business segments, extensive work and their own way of doing things, this was, again, there was no visibility of what one business segment is doing versus the other. So bringing all those key stakeholders in one place, bringing all the the department, the functional leaders to align on one process was not an easy task. Actually, it took us a lot of time to collect the requirements and come up with common requirements which everybody agreed on. And engage them and figuring out, if this particular business unit is doing it this way while the other one is doing a different way. So what is, look at the pros and cons and then come on a common way of doing things, right? So it was not easy. Actually, that was the biggest struggle we had actually with this project, but we were able to figure it out. We had an organization, change management folks engaged. We captured the as-is process for all the different business segments, and then came up with what is going to be the to-be solution, right? And that was the biggest challenge actually we had. And then when you work closely with those functional leaders, you identify, then you figure out, okay, they had their own different, corner cases where they were doing things in a different way. And we had to take care of those also. And everybody wanted their, particular, thing to be working as is. People in general don't like change, but
Yeah.
you have to convince them slowly that, guys, this is for your good, this is for the company's good.
Yeah.
This is how you can become more efficient. You save, bring a lot more savings to the company. So we have to think about it, you have to consider it. So we had to do a lot of coaching there, and help people accept that this will be the new way of doing things, and bring them on the same table, to agree
Yeah.
on the final solution.
So was there, Chandra, then, was there a joint initiative for training for the people on the SpartanNash team, whether it was the accountants, the mailroom, like how did you guys take that on or support that?
Yeah, so it is a collaborative effort. So the moment we got to know what steps were to be automated, the coaching of the business folks were taken up by SpartanNash themselves, educating them on what this automation would deliver and probably how they have to change the way they are currently operating, or something that's taken up by Anila's change management organization that was there within SpartanNash. While Hexaware team articulated what changes would be upcoming and how the business folks need to change, the coaching of the business team was happening in parallel by the SpartanNash team. And
Okay.
without that, I don't think the project would have been successful.
Oh,
And
yeah. I mean, that's something and if I can switch to the next slide really quickly, that's something that we kind of discussed and called out in like the challenges and the calibrations we found. Change management and stakeholder inclusion. I mean, in general, for any organization, like what you discussed and what you touched on, Anila, is so incredibly common. I know the metaphor of the iceberg is just super common for hidden challenges, but it is so often the case that the actual portion of process building, the actual automation and development in and of itself is just what you see on the surface. And that massive amount of work and undertaking is kind of what goes into it. So if you're getting into a project like this, if you're looking at this type of automation initiative or this type of effort for a business unit or for your whole organization, just know and consider that a lot of the upfront work, that process mining, that buy-in from the business units and the different leaders, and establishing what are best practices and what's unnecessary, all of that work is going to be a big component of the end solution. And it's often a lot of thankless work, but it makes the final product so much better, from my perspective.
Totally agree. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have started working with SpartanNash in identifying and creating a pipeline of opportunities. So on an ongoing basis, the Hexaware team, after delivering the AR and AP automation project, which was delivered earlier, we continue to mine for opportunities across the landscape. We present it to Anila and her team. They help either prioritize the opportunities, they help curate the pipeline. So it is a joint exercise that we have set up, and this is right now running in autopilot mode. So on an ongoing basis, on a monthly basis, we have a working forum where we create a pipeline of opportunities, identify, present it to Anila and the team. They review it, prioritize it based on business needs, and immediately it is taken up by the development team for automation. So this factory or automation model is what has contributed to the success, because we don't necessarily wait for 100% clarity. So I think the first statement that you mentioned is a perfect statement here. That is, we are not waiting for 100% clarity and delaying for the sake of perfection. Obviously, automation needs to become a culture within an organization, and that is what Hexaware is striving to do or help SpartanNash achieve. And good that SpartanNash also has got a dedicated team and a leadership which is focused on automation, which is not taking up automation as a parallel track. It's a dedicated track within SpartanNash. I think Anila and her team are helping drive that very efficiently.
Yeah, that's a good summary of that. just one other thing I wanted to call out, we touched on it a little bit, but I know something you'd mentioned in previous conversations we had is, the complexity of blending in applications that were homegrown. I think it was is it the decision support system, the DSS application, something that was built out by different people or different groups within SpartanNash. We often see that trying to blend homegrown applications and make sure that there aren't versioning issues with other, systems, and how everything fits together can be a big challenge that's often overlooked. Were there any other if you had to do this again, were there any other things or considerations that you would have, or recommendations you would make to someone taking on something like this, like the homegrown application integrations or that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there are many challenges. What we have experienced here, because when we are talking about the standard applications like PeopleSoft and JDE, the interfaces are well defined, they are well tested, and they comply with some, with all the other, interfaces which are used globally by other applications of the similar kind, right? But when you have homegrown applications, they're customized. They're customized for each and every need or different scenarios, because you control them, you have your own team, and you can flex them and modify them to fit your own needs, right? Or specific use cases. So we had that challenge, and that was the most difficult interface that we had to come up and make sure that we take care of all corner cases, all specific or special scenarios, all the customization are taken care of for that particular application. So yeah, it makes your requirements complex. It makes your the list of use cases and the list of test use cases also were becoming complex for us, But we had to work very closely with the team which worked on that application, and we had to come up with a list of prioritized use cases, that what must be working in the new system, and what is a nice to have feature, and which can still be done outside of automation. And then eventually we will have a follow-up project to complete, or a smaller mini project to accommodate those special cases or those customization to be taken care of. So we did end up having a minor mini project in the end, where we delivered additional enhancements and additional functionalities which were part of that customized application actually. So that's how we handled it.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. And I think those are, like you said, those are good things to consider, and what team needs to be involved, and the different people and stakeholders that need to be identified for those types of mini integration projects too. So that's a good point to note. Unfortunately, we are well over time. I'm so sorry about that, everybody. I don't think we're going to be able to get to questions at this point, but we can follow up via email with anyone that has any additional questions or would like some more information. Check out our websites, sync up with us on LinkedIn. Anila and Chandra and I'd be happy to connect and address any additional questions or any follow-up that you're looking for. Anila and Chandra, thank you so much for joining. It's a pleasure, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandyn, for organizing this and presenting this to a lot of audience. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.